The starving child. The wind howled through the dark alleys of Tarkin 5, a cold and dying colony on the edge of the galaxy. The towering buildings, once full of life, now stood like silent tombstones. The streets, the humans' unbelievable act. Zuru sat on the cold, cracked pavement, his hand still trembling as he wiped the last crumbs from his lips. His stomach, though still empty, no longer ached as violently. The warmth of the bread lingered on his tongue, a sensation he hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. Yet, the real shock wasn't the food. It was her. The human girl knelt beside him, arms resting on her knees, watching him with an expression he couldn't understand. Concern, pity, kindness. Why? Why would a human care? For as long as he could remember, the elders had warned him about humans. They were greedy, selfish, and dangerous. They destroyed worlds, conquered civilizations, and took whatever they wanted without mercy. And yet, this one had given him food. Zuru's throat was dry, not from hunger but from confusion. This didn't make sense. His voice was hoarse as he spoke. "You gave me food." The girl smiled. "Yeah." Zuru shook his head, blinking rapidly. "But why?" She shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. "Because you needed it." Zuru's head spun. That answer made no sense. No one gave food to the weak. No one helped the dying. The rule of Tarkin 5 was clear. Only the strong deserved to live. And yet here she was, proving everything he knew wrong. "What's your name?" she asked. Zuru hesitated. Giving a name meant trust. Trust was dangerous. She must have noticed his hesitation because she chuckled. "All right. No name then. You can call me Emily." She stretched out her hand, palm up, waiting for him to shake it. Zuru stared at it. A human was offering to touch him. On Tarkin 5, no one touched the weak. The weak were ignored. The weak were invisible. And yet, Emily saw him. Slowly, uncertainly, he reached out. His small, clawed fingers barely brushed her skin before she grasped his hand and shook it firmly. "See, not so bad, right?" she said, her voice light. Zuru didn't answer. He was still trying to understand what was happening. Then, Emily stood up and dusted off her pants. "Come on, kid. You can't stay here." Zuru stiffened. "What?" She gestured toward the dark alley. "You're starving. You need real food, not scraps. And a place to sleep. Let's go." Zuru's mind raced. Go with her? Leave this place? Was that even possible? I can't," he muttered, shrinking back. "This is my home." Emily gave him a long look. She didn't laugh. She didn't mock him. She just tilted her head and said, "No, it's your prison." Zuru had no response. Emily sighed and reached into her bag again. This time, she pulled out a silver packet. Tearing it open, she revealed a bar of dense protein, thick and rich with nutrients. Even from a distance, the scent hit Zuru's nose, making his stomach twist painfully. She held it out to him. "If you come with me, there's more of this. A lot more." Zuru's mouth went dry. He had two choices: stay here on this dying world, and starve like the elders said he would. Take her hand, leave and see if this human was truly different from the stories. His heart pounded. Trust was dangerous. Trust got people killed. But hunger was worse. With slow, shaking hands, Zuru reached for the protein bar. He grabbed it and tore off a chunk with his sharp teeth, chewing desperately. It was the best thing he had ever tasted. Emily smiled. "That's the spirit." She turned and started walking away. Zuru hesitated for only a second. Then he followed. A new world awaits. The two of them moved through the empty alleys, avoiding the patrol drones that scanned the streets. Emily walked ahead, moving like she belonged here, even though she clearly didn't. Zuru kept close behind, his ears twitching at every sound. "Where are we going?" he asked, still unsure if he had made the right choice. Emily glanced back. My ship. Zuru froze. A ship? You're leaving the planet? Emily nodded. Yep. That's the plan. Zuru's heart pounded. No one left Tarkin 5. It was a graveyard, a place where people came to die, not to escape. Why? Why are you taking me? Emily stopped. She turned to face him fully, green eyes serious now. Because, she said slowly, I don't like watching good people suffer. Zuru stared at her. Good people? He was not a good person. He was weak, useless. He had nothing to offer. And yet, Emily didn't see him that way. Something deep inside his chest twisted painfully. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't fear. It was something new. Hope. Zuru didn't speak. He just nodded and followed her. The danger ahead. They reached an abandoned hangar on the outskirts of the colony. A small spaceship sat inside, old but functional. Emily led him up the ramp, sealing the door behind them. All right, she said, strap in. We're getting out of here. Zuru hesitated. What if the colony stops us? Emily smirked, flipping a switch. The engines roared to life. Then they'll have to catch me first. For the first time in his life, Zuru wasn't running from death. He was running toward something new. But deep in the colony, someone had already noticed the ship's power-up sequence. And they weren't going to let them leave so easily. A dangerous secret. The engines of Emily's ship roared to life, shaking the ground as the thrusters powered up. The dim blue glow of the exhaust reflected off the cold metal walls of the abandoned hangar, casting long shadows. Zuru sat in the co-pilot's seat, his small hands gripping the armrests tightly. His heart pounded in his chest. This was it. He was leaving Tarkin 5. A world where he had only known hunger, pain, and loneliness. A place where the strong ignored the weak. A planet that had sentenced him to die. And yet, he felt afraid. Emily, sitting in the pilot's seat, tapped a few buttons on the control panel. The screens flickered to life, displaying the ship's systems. She adjusted a few levers, a focused look on her face. All right, kid. Hold on tight. This might get bumpy. Zuru swallowed hard. He had never been on a spaceship before. He had never even seen the stars beyond the dark, polluted sky of Tarkin 5. Emily grinned. Here we go. She pulled the throttle back, and the ship lurched upward. For a moment, Zuru felt weightless, his stomach twisting in panic as they lifted off the ground. His claws dug into the seat. The ship rumbled as they cleared the hangar, breaking through the colony's outer zone. For the first time, Zuru saw the sky open up before him. A vast, endless darkness stretched out beyond the clouds, speckled with shimmering stars. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. And then, alarms started blaring. Emily's grin vanished. She quickly scanned the radar. Red dots appeared on the screen. Damn it, she muttered. We've got company. Zuru turned to the window, and his stomach dropped. 3 patrol ships were closing in. The colony had noticed their escape. They're going to shoot us down. Zuru gasped. Emily's fingers flew across the controls. Not if I can help it. The ship jerked to the side, narrowly dodging an energy blast from the pursuing vessels. Zuru was slammed against the seat, his breath knocked from his lungs. Emily flipped a switch, and the ship's rear thrusters ignited at full power, sending them rocketing forward at an impossible speed. The colony ships followed. Zuru's claws dug into his seat. We can't outrun them. Emily smirked. We're not outrunning them. We're outsmarting them. She pulled the ship into a tight spin, diving toward the atmosphere. The colony ships followed, trying to lock onto them with their weapons. Come on, just a little closer, Emily whispered, eyes locked on the screen. The patrol ships closed the distance, their weapons charged up, glowing with deadly energy. And then, Emily pulled a lever. The ship's wings retracted, the engines cut power, and they suddenly dropped like a rock. Zuru's stomach flipped as the ship plummeted downward. The enemy ships, moving too fast, overshot them. Emily grinned. Gotcha. She reignited the engines, the ship blasting off in the opposite direction, escaping into the upper atmosphere before the patrol ships could correct their course. Zeru's head was spinning. You planned that?" he asked, breathless. Emily winked. "I told you. I don't lose." The colony ships were still searching for them below, but they had already broken free of Tarkin V's gravity. Zeru turned to look out the window, and his breath caught in his throat. Space. Endless, dark, and full of stars. He had never seen anything so vast. So free. For a moment, he forgot about hunger. He forgot about fear. And then, Emily's ship computer beeped. A transmission signal. Emily's smile disappeared. She hit a button, and a deep, gravelly voice came through the speakers. "This is Warlord Khazur of the Valyrian Empire. The child belongs to us. Surrender him now, or be destroyed." Zeru froze. His blood ran cold. They knew. Emily turned to look at him, frowning. "You want to tell me what that's about, kid?" Zeru's hands clenched into fists. I don't know," he lied. But deep down he did. They weren't chasing Emily. They were chasing him. He was more than just an orphan from a dying colony. He was something much, much bigger. And now, the entire Valyrian Empire was after him. Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. "You know, I really hate getting mixed up in galactic conspiracies." She turned to the controls and punched the hyperdrive. The stars stretched into long streaks of light, and they were gone. But in the darkness of space, Warlord Khazur watched their trail. And he smiled. "Run, little human," he muttered. "You won't get far." Betrayal and escape. The ship shot through hyperspace, streaks of light blurring outside the windows. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Zeru sat in the co-pilot's seat, staring at his hands. His claws dug into his palms. He could still hear the warlord's voice in his head. "The child belongs to us. Surrender him now, or be destroyed." Emily, sitting across from him, tapped her fingers on the dashboard, eyes locked on him. The glow from the control panel illuminated her face, highlighting her unreadable expression. "All right, kid," she finally said, breaking the silence. "I'm gonna need some answers. Right now." Zeru flinched. "Answers," he repeated, stalling for time. Emily leaned forward. "Yeah, answers. Because last I checked, random street kids don't get warlords threatening to destroy an entire ship just to get them back." Her green eyes narrowed. "So, what are you?" Zeru swallowed hard. The truth clawed at his throat, begging to be spoken. But he had been raised to keep secrets, to never reveal what he was. Yet Emily had saved him, fed him, risked her life for him. He exhaled slowly. He hesitated. "I don't know exactly." Emily crossed her arms. "Try again." Zeru sighed, his small shoulders slumping. "I was born in the royal sector of the Valyrian Empire," he admitted. "My parents, they were important. I think. I never met them." Emily's eyes flickered with recognition. "You're a royal." Zeru nodded. "But when I was a baby, something happened. A coup, I think. Someone overthrew my family. They killed everyone, except me." Emily's lips parted slightly, but she stayed quiet, letting him continue. "I was smuggled off-world by a rebel faction," Zeru said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They hid me on Tarkin V, told me to stay low, stay hidden. But then they disappeared. And I was left alone." Emily let out a slow whistle. "So let me get this straight. You're not just some orphan. You're a missing heir to an empire." Zeru grimaced. "Technically, yes. But I don't even know if I have a claim to anything anymore. Warlord Khazur rules now." Emily ran a hand through her short brown hair. "And now that he knows you're alive, he's coming for you." Silence settled between them. Then the ship shuddered violently. Alarms blared, red warning lights flashing across the control panels. Emily snapped to attention, hands flying to the controls. "What the hell? We're still in hyperspace," she shouted. Zuru's heart raced. "We're being pulled out." The ship lurched, hyperspace trails collapsing around them as the stars snapped back into place. A massive Valyrian battleship loomed before them, its dark, jagged form blocking their escape. Emily cursed under her breath. "Damn it. How did they track us?" Zuru paled. "They must have put a tracer on the ship before we left Tarkin 5. The battleship's comms lit up. A deep, chilling voice echoed through the cabin. "Emily Carter, your ship is disabled. Surrender the child, and you will be spared." Emily's knuckles whitened as she gripped the controls. "Like hell I will." The ship shook again, but this time, it wasn't a weapon strike. Something inside the ship was wrong. Zuru's ears twitched. Footsteps. His blood ran cold. "Emily," he whispered, "we're not alone." Before she could react, a blast door slammed open. 3 Valyrian soldiers stormed inside, weapons raised. Emily spun around, drawing her pistol in a flash. But it was too late. A 4th figure stepped in behind them, a familiar face. "Keth." Emily's breath hitched. "You." Zuru felt his stomach drop. Keth was the alien who had helped Emily repair her ship on Tarkin 5. A friend. Or so they had thought. "I'm sorry, Emily," Keth said, voice laced with regret. "But I can't let you keep him." Betrayal. Zuru felt it like a blade to his chest. Emily's grip on her gun tightened. "You sold us out." Keth looked away. "I had no choice. Warlord Khazur controls everything. He promised me safety if I turned you in." Emily let out a cold laugh. "And you actually believed him?" Keth hesitated, but before he could respond, one of the soldiers swung the butt of his rifle straight into Emily's head. She collapsed instantly. "No!" Zuru shouted, scrambling toward her, only for a soldier to grab him by the collar. Pain shot through his skull as he was slammed against the wall. The last thing he saw before everything went dark was Emily's unconscious form being dragged away. Captured. Zuru's head throbbed. His body ached. He was cold. When he finally opened his eyes, he found himself in a cell. Dim red lights flickered above. The walls were made of reinforced metal, humming with energy. The air smelled sterile and metallic. And then he saw her. Emily was on the other side of the cell, still unconscious. A dark bruise had formed on her temple where the rifle had hit her. Zuru scrambled toward her. "Emily." He shook her gently. "Wake up." She groaned, eyes fluttering open. "Ugh, remind me to shoot Keth next time I see him." Zuru let out a breath of relief. "What do we do now?" Emily slowly sat up, rubbing her head. "First, we get out of here." A loud metallic clank made them both look up. The cell door slid open. 2 heavily armed guards stepped inside. And between them, Warlord Khazur. His towering form filled the room, dark armor reflecting the dim red lights. His golden eyes gleamed as he looked down at them. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "So," he said, voice deep and powerful, "the last hair of Valyria finally returns home." Zuru's blood turned to ice. Emily stepped in front of him, shielding him. Khazur chuckled. "Brave little human." He tilted his head. "But bravery won't save him. Or you." Emily didn't flinch. "Try me." Khazur's smile widened. "Oh, I intend to." The chase begins. The cold, sterile air of the Valyrian battleship hummed with power. The walls were lined with intricate carvings of ancient victories, reminders of a long, ruthless history. And now, standing in the center of the dimly lit holding cell, Warlord Khazur loomed over his 2 captives like a shadow of death itself. Emily didn't move. She stood protectively in front of Zuru, her hands balled into fists, even though she was outnumbered, outgunned, and locked in a prison cell. Zuru felt like his lungs had stopped working. The warlord's golden eyes burned into him with a gaze so intense, it felt as if the air had thickened around him. So small, so fragile, Khazur murmured, staring at Zuru. And yet, my empire shook at the mere whisper of your survival. His voice was deep, layered with amusement, and something darker, something hungry. Emily spat at the floor. Yeah. Well, maybe your empire should learn to mind its own business. Khazur let out a deep chuckle. And maybe you should learn when you are outmatched, human. Emily didn't blink. Funny thing about humans, we don't care. A flicker of annoyance crossed Khazur's face. His armored hand shot out, grabbing Emily by the throat. Zuru gasped, stepping forward, but a guard shoved him back against the wall. Emily choked, but her glare didn't falter. She didn't struggle, didn't beg. Khazur's grip tightened slightly before he let go. Emily staggered but refused to fall. Interesting, he mused. Most creatures tremble in my presence, but you are different. He turned his gaze back to Zuru. And you, little hare, you are a mistake that should have been erased long ago. Zuru clenched his fists. If you think I'm afraid of you, you're wrong. Khazur grinned, showing sharp teeth. Oh, I don't need you to fear me, boy. I only need you to understand one thing. He leaned down, so close that Zuru could see his reflection in those golden eyes. You have no future. Zuru's chest tightened, but before he could reply, an alarm suddenly blared through the ship. Khazur straightened, eyes narrowing. One of his guards tapped his communicator. Warlord, we have. The guard didn't get to finish. Because at that moment, the entire battleship shook. A thunderous explosion rocked the structure, sending tremors through the floor. The walls groaned under the pressure as lights flickered wildly. Khazur's expression darkened. What is happening? He barked. The guard checked the monitor on his wrist, his eyes widening in panic. Sir, a ship just breached the hangar. It's attacking us. Emily's lips curled into a smirk. Guess you underestimated how many people I pissed off. Khazur growled, his sharp teeth grinding. Secure the prisoners. The guards lunged, but Emily was already moving. She dropped to the floor, kicked out her legs, and sent one guard tumbling into the other. Before they could recover, she grabbed the stun baton from the first guard's belt and slammed it into his chest. Crack! Electricity surged through the alien's body, and he collapsed with a grunt. Zuru's eyes widened. How did you? Not my first time escaping a prison cell, kid, Emily shouted. Khazur's roar of anger shook the walls, but before he could attack, another explosion tore through the ship. The floor tilted sharply, sending everyone tumbling. Emily grabbed Zuru by the wrist. We're leaving. Now. Zuru didn't argue. They bolted out of the cell just as another blast of plasma fire erupted behind them. Khazur's guards recovered quickly, chasing after them with weapons drawn. Go left, Emily shouted. They sprinted down the metallic hallway, alarms wailing around them. The ship shook again. Whoever was attacking was relentless. Who's even helping us? Zuru gasped as they ran. Emily grinned. Hopefully, someone friendly. They rounded a corner, only to skid to a stop. A squad of 6 armed soldiers stood in their way. Zuru's stomach dropped. Damn, Emily muttered. The soldiers raised their weapons. Then, a flash of blue light tore through them. Every single one collapsed instantly. Zuru's mouth fell open. What? A familiar voice echoed through the hallway. Took you long enough, Carter. From the smoke, a tall humanoid figure emerged, carrying a massive plasma rifle. His mechanical left arm whirred as he reloaded. Emily's eyes lit up. Rail, you crazy bastard. Rail smirked. Miss me. Zuru had no idea who this was, but at this moment, he didn't care. Emily grabbed his wrist again. Come on, let's move. Rail led them through the chaotic corridors, blasting through more guards with precise shots. You stole a warlord's prisoner, Carter, he said, grinning. That's new, even for you. Yeah, well, Emily shot back. I like high-stakes games. They burst into the hangar, where a sleek black starship sat waiting. Its engines rumbled, thrusters glowing a brilliant blue. Get in, Rail shouted. They sprinted up the ramp, just as more guards stormed into the hangar. Seal the doors, Emily yelled. Rail slammed his fist into a panel, locking the ship down. Zuru barely had time to process what was happening before Emily shoved him into a seat and strapped him in. Rail fired up the engines. Hold on, he roared. The ship blasted out of the hangar, dodging incoming fire as it shot into open space. Zuru's hands gripped the seat tightly, his heart slamming in his chest. Emily whooped, pumping a fist in the air. Now that's an escape. Rail snorted. We're not out yet. Look behind us. Zuru turned, and his breath caught. Khazur's battleship was turning, preparing to fire. A massive plasma cannon hummed to life, glowing with deadly energy. They're going to fire, Zuru yelled. Rail didn't hesitate. He slammed the hyperdrive switch. The ship shuddered, then shot forward into hyperspace. Khazur's weapon fired, but they were already gone. The three of them sat in stunned silence. Then Emily grinned. That was fun. Zuru let out a long breath. Are you insane? Emily laughed. A little. Rail rolled his eyes. We're not in the clear yet. That warlord isn't going to stop. Zuru's chest tightened. Khazur wasn't done with him. He wasn't done at all. A shocking truth. The ship rocketed through hyperspace, its hull vibrating from the sheer force of the jump. The streaks of distant stars outside the cockpit stretched endlessly, blending into a river of light. Zuru sat in the co-pilot's seat, his small frame tense. His chest still heaved from the escape. His mind spun. His heart pounded. He was still alive. Emily sat beside him, her fingers tapping lazily on the control panel, as if she hadn't just pulled off one of the most daring prison breaks in Valyrian history. Behind them, in the dimly lit cabin, their unlikely rescuer, Rail, leaned back against the wall, arms crossed over his chest. His cybernetic left arm whirred slightly as he adjusted his grip. For a while, no one spoke. Then, finally, Rail broke the silence. All right, kid. Time to talk. Zuru flinched. He didn't know what to say. He just got kidnapped, nearly executed, and then saved by a lunatic. Emily said, smirking. Give him a minute. Rail. Rail sighed. He doesn't have a minute. We all don't. Khazur isn't going to stop hunting us. Zuru clenched his fists. He knew Rail was right. The warlord had spoken to him like he was nothing, like he had no right to exist. But if that were true, why go through all this trouble to capture him? Khazur said you were the last heir of Valyria. Rail continued, his dark eyes locked on Zuru. That true? Zuru hesitated. Then, slowly, he nodded. My family ruled the Valyrian Empire once, he admitted, before Khazur took over. Rail whistled lowly. Damn, that's big news. Emily raised an eyebrow. How big? Rail gave her a sharp look. Kid's not just a random heir, Carter. If what he's saying is true, he's the rightful ruler of the Valyrian throne. Zuru's stomach twisted. Rightful ruler? No, that didn't make sense. He was just a street orphan. A nobody. That can't be right, he muttered. I don't remember anything about ruling. You wouldn't, Rail said. Khazur must have wiped every trace of your existence from history. That's why you were left to rot on Tarkin 5. If anyone had found out you were alive, it would have been a problem for him. Emily frowned. Okay, hold up. Why would an entire empire care about one lost kid? Rail leaned forward. Because, he said, Zuru isn't just an heir. He's a direct descendant of the first dynasty of Valyria. Zuru stiffened. He had heard whispers of the first dynasty in the colony streets, but only as myths, legends. The first dynasty, Emily repeated. Rael nodded. The bloodline of the old rulers, the ones who built the Valyrian Empire from nothing. Their power was absolute. Zuru shook his head. That was thousands of years ago. The first dynasty is gone. Rael's cybernetic fingers flexed slightly. Not gone, he corrected. Hunted. Erased. The ones who survived. They were in hiding. Some rebel factions believed that if a true heir ever returned, the empire would rise again. Emily exhaled. Okay, so Zuru's technically a prince. What does that change? Rael smirked. It means Khazur's empire isn't as stable as he pretends it is. The word sent a chill down Zuru's spine. Why do you care? He asked Rael, narrowing his eyes. Rael grinned, but there was no humor in it. Because, kid, I hate Khazur. He leaned back against the metal wall, stretching his legs out. That bastard wiped out my entire squad years ago, he said, voice suddenly quiet. All because we refused to follow his orders. I've been working against him ever since. When I heard rumors that some human pilot had stolen a high-value prisoner from under his nose, I had to see for myself. Emily smirked. You're welcome. Rael shook his head with amusement. Still reckless, Carter. Zuru's head spun. This was too much, too fast. He had spent years believing he was nothing. Now these people were telling him he was something important. Maybe too important. His stomach churned. He didn't want to be in hair. He just wanted to survive. We have to disappear, he muttered. Khazur won't stop. He'll track us again. Rael and Emily exchanged a look. Not if we get to the rebels first, Rael said. Zuru blinked. The rebels? Rael nodded. There's a resistance movement against Khazur. They'd been waiting for a symbol, something to rally behind. Kid, whether you like it or not, you're it. The words hit Zuru like a punch. I don't want to be a symbol, he muttered. Emily placed a hand on his shoulder. I know, kid, she said, but you already are. A sudden beep from the ship's console interrupted them. Rael stepped forward, eyes narrowing at the screen. Incoming transmission. It's encrypted. Emily frowned. Can you decode it? Rael's cybernetic fingers moved across the panel. The static-filled message crackled through the speakers. Do you copy? This is General Tavik of the Resistance. We know you have the boy. If you want to live, set coordinates to the following sector. The message cut off abruptly. A new warning alarm blared. Emily's fingers danced over the controls. Something's wrong. Rael swore. I see it. We've got an incoming ship. Zuru's heart slammed against his ribs. It's Khazur, isn't it? He whispered. Rael's eyes darkened. No, it's worse. Emily's face paled. What's worse than a warlord? Rael tapped the screen, zooming in on the approaching vessel. A massive dreadnought-class warship loomed ahead. That, Rael muttered grimly, is a hunter fleet. Emily stiffened. That's impossible. Khazur wouldn't send a hunter fleet unless... Her voice trailed off. Zuru swallowed hard. Unless what? Rael turned to him, his face unreadable. Unless he thinks you're actually worth something. Silence filled the ship. Then, the hunter fleet opened fire. The final stand. The hunter fleet bore down on them like a pack of predatory beasts, their massive warships cutting through space with terrifying precision. Glowing red targeting systems locked onto their small craft, warning sirens blaring through the cabin as a flurry of enemy missiles launched forward. Zuru froze in his seat. His mind screamed at him to move, to do something. But what could he do? He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. He was just a starving orphan that fate had decided to curse. Emily, however, was already in motion. Rael, get us into evasive maneuvers. Now, she barked, gripping the ship's controls. Rael's cybernetic hand flicked a switch, and their ship jerked sharply to the side. the thrusters burning white-hot as they barely dodged the first barrage of missiles. The shockwave from the explosion rattled the hull, sending vibrations through Zeru's seat. Emily's fingers flew across the control panel, her expression deadly focused. "Shields at 40%. We can't take another hit like that." Rail gritted his teeth. "Hold on. I've got countermeasures." He activated the flare systems, launching a stream of heat-seeking decoys. More enemy missiles exploded in the distance, but the warships weren't letting up. Their cannons charged up again. Zeru's stomach twisted in terror. "They're not letting us go." Rail's face was grim. They never were. The ship's communication system crackled to life, and a voice, cold, powerful, and filled with malice, echoed through the cabin. "There is no escape. Surrender the boy now, and we will grant you quick deaths." Zeru's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. Khazur. He could almost see the warlord's cruel grin as his words dripped with amusement. "You have nowhere to run, little hare," Khazur continued. "And your foolish protectors have only delayed the inevitable. Do you really think a pathetic street rat like you can defy the might of the Empire?" Zeru clenched his fists. He was shaking, not just from fear, but from something else. Rage. For years, he had been told that he was worthless, that he would never be anything. For years, he had lived in the shadows, hiding, starving, suffering, because monsters like Khazur decided his fate before he even had a chance to live. And now he was done running. Zeru lifted his head. His heart pounded against his ribs like a war drum. "No," he said quietly. Emily and Rail both turned to look at him. "What?" Emily asked. Zeru's small hands trembled, but his voice was steady. "No more running," he said, lifting his chin. "We fight." Emily's eyes widened. "Kid, that's suicide. We're outgunned." Rail's expression was unreadable. "You sure about this, kid?" Zeru's breath was shaky, but his resolve was not. "I might be weak. I might be small. But I'm still alive." His eyes burned with determination. "And I'm done letting Khazur decide my fate." Rail studied him for a long moment. Then, a slow, wolfish grin spread across his face. "Heh, I like this kid." Emily groaned. "Oh, we are so gonna die." Then she grinned too. "All right, let's give them hell." The last stand. The plan was insane. The odds, worse than terrible. But if they were going to die, they were going to die on their own terms. Emily and Rail threw the ship into an impossible dive, weaving between enemy fire as they closed the distance toward the lead warship. Khazur's voice roared through the comms. "What are you doing? You cannot hope to win." Zeru leaned forward, gripping the edge of his seat. "That's where you're wrong." And then he did something Khazur never expected. He hacked the warship's systems, the secret power of the First Dynasty. Zeru had never understood why he could do certain things that others couldn't. He had always been able to sense machines, to feel them in a way that no one else could. On Tarkin V, he had used this gift to steal scraps of food from security drones, to listen in on encrypted transmissions. But now, he was going to use it to bring down a warlord. His fingers danced across the control panel, his mind sensing with the ship's systems in a way he didn't even fully understand. "I need a direct link to their network," Zeru said. Rail raised an eyebrow. "Kid, that's a Valyrian warship. You're not just hacking a vending machine." "Just do it," Zeru shouted. Rail hesitated for only a second, then flipped a switch, connecting Zeru to the ship's targeting systems. Zeru closed his eyes. And then, he felt it. The warship's heart, the pulsing, beating core of its network. He could feel the weapons systems, the engines, the defense protocols, all laid bare before him like an open book. And he rewrote the story. "What the?" Khazur's voice crackled through the comms as his flagship's weapons suddenly turned against his own fleet. The hunter ships panicked, confused as their leader's vessel began firing at them instead of the enemy. "No, this is impossible," Khazur screamed. Zuru's mind strained under the effort. Blood trickled from his nose, his body shaking from the pressure of controlling something so vast. But he held on. Because this time, he was in control. "Emily? Rail. Now." Zuru gasped. Emily didn't hesitate. She pulled the trigger. A missile shot forward, straight into Khazur's warship's main reactor. The fall of a warlord. The explosion was blinding. A wave of fire and debris consumed the Valyrian flagship as its core detonated from within. Shockwaves rippled outward, sending enemy ships spiraling into chaos. Khazur's final scream of rage was cut off as his warship collapsed into fire and ruin. The warlord was no more. The remaining hunter ships, leaderless and terrified, scattered. And just like that, the chase was over. A new beginning. Zuru slumped forward, exhausted. His mind swam, his limbs weak. Emily caught him before he could collapse. "Easy, kid. You did it." Rail let out a deep breath. "Holy hell. We actually won." Zuru forced a small, tired smile. For the first time in his life, he wasn't running anymore. He wasn't just some orphan from a dying colony. He was the last heir of Valyria. And the galaxy had just learned his name. The end, or the beginning.